There's a great story that Michael Marion, a futurist, thinking about what's needed for the future, tells this little sort of parable, and he calls it the Sandbox Syndrome. And he has you envisage sandboxes that people put their kids in, to keep them out of their hair in the garden, And so he tells the story where in the United States, the government was feeling threatened by the environmental movement early on. And so the CIA started keeping records of different environmentalists. And so people like myself had files on them. And so he continues this story, and in this story, the CIA agents decide they've got to infiltrate the environmental movement. And their strategy is to put each little group, the Save the Whale people in the Save the Whale sandbox, and the anti-nuclear people in the anti-nuclear sandbox, and the biodiversity people in the biodiversity sandbox. So they're each in separate little boxes. So the CIA agents say to each of these groups, to the whale people, well, you're really dealing with the most important issue of our time. I mean, these people who are on the nuclear thing are misled, but the whale thing is the real thing, and and so forth and so forth. And by keeping them all separate and competitive with one another, they're basically disempowered. And they encourage people to see how many people turn up to a meeting as a measure of whether you're successful, or how many people subscribe to the magazine on Save the Whale or whatever it is, Greenpeace. And then to develop some particular language for each thing. So we'll talk about reconstituting thinking, or whatever the language is, to develop this wanky language that excludes these people from the rest of society. And the parable goes on that these CIA agents are hanging around with these people so long, and they're such lovely people, that they get converted. And they come out of the closet and they say, look, I'm actually a CIA agent, and to be effective, you've got to do the opposite of everything I've told you. You've got to get out of that sandbox and look at your commonality with all those other groups and form alliances right across all those groups. And you've got to stop using that wanky language. And you've got to get some measures of success that if you're against sediment going down the river, what you're measuring is the sediment going down the river, not how many people come to the meeting about sediment going down the river, and so forth. And I think that insight is as relevant today as it was back in probably the 70s when Michael Marion wrote a little 2-page paper called the Sandbox Syndrome.